Colorado Territory, 1868. The prairie wind whispered secrets across the tall grass as Zara Sinclair stood on the porch of her small farmhouse, her slender fingers clutching the weathered railing. At 23, she was already a widow, the war having claimed her husband Thomas just months after their wedding. Her honey-blonde hair, usually pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, now blew freely in the autumn breeze. The simple blue calico dress she wore had seen better days, much like the farmstead she struggled to maintain alone. Not much of a harvest this year, she murmured to herself, surveying the modest field of wheat that had survived the summer drought. Her eyes, the color of summer storms, scanned the horizon where dark clouds gathered. Zara had come to believe that the frontier was no place for tenderness or dreams. It demanded grit, calluses, and a heart protected by walls thick as the sod that built many homes in these parts. The approaching storm matched her mood as she turned back toward the farmhouse door. 2 years of solitude had taught her that survival required independence. Love was a luxury the frontier didn't afford, especially not to a woman trying to hold onto her land alone. The county clerk had made that clear enough last month when he'd suggested she consider the marriage proposals from men twice her age who eyed her 20 acres with more interest than they did her. "I need no one," she reminded herself. The words had become a mantra, repeated often enough that she almost believed them. Almost. Inside the small but tidy home, Zara stirred the stew that would be her evening meal. The cabin Thomas had built before marching off to war was simple, a main room with a cooking hearth, a small bedroom, and a root cellar below. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she intended to keep it that way. The photograph of Thomas in his Union uniform watched her from the mantel, his youthful face frozen in time. "I'm doing my best," she told the silent image. "I promised I would." The first raindrops struck the roof as Zara sat down with her Bible and a single candle. She read passages about strength and endurance, about God's plan being greater than what mortal eyes could see. But lately, faith felt as distant as the mountains on the horizon, visible but unreachable. The storm intensified, thunder cracking like rifle shots across the prairie. Zara had just closed her Bible when another sound caught her attention. Not thunder, hoofbeats, approaching fast. Visitors were rare, especially in weather like this. Rarer still after nightfall. Zara reached for the rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot before he left. She checked the chamber with practiced hands, then moved to the window. Through sheets of rain, she spotted a horse and rider moving erratically. The horse seemed to be struggling, its gait uneven. The rider slumped forward, barely staying mounted. As lightning split the sky, Zara caught sight of something dark spreading across the rider's side, blood. Her first instinct was caution. Raiders and outlaws were not uncommon, and a woman alone made an easy target. But as she watched the rider slip further, something else stirred within her. Compassion, perhaps. Or the simple recognition of another soul in trouble on this unforgiving frontier. "Damn it all," she whispered, setting the rifle aside but keeping it within reach. Zara pulled a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the downpour. The rider was almost to her yard when the inevitable happened. He slipped from the saddle completely, hitting the muddy ground with a dull thud that was nearly lost in the storm. Approaching cautiously, rifle now back in hand, Zara called out, "Don't move, I've got a gun trained on you." The figure on the ground made no response. The horse, a handsome bay gelding, nervously pawed the earth beside its fallen master. Zara moved closer, water plastering her dress to her body and her hair to her face. The rider was a young man, perhaps 25, with dark brown hair and a face that might have been handsome if not contorted in pain. His clothes marked him as a cowhand, worn boots, denim trousers, cotton shirt now soaked with both rain and blood. A six-shooter remained holstered at his hip. "Can you hear me?" Zara asked, keeping a safe distance. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of whiskey. "Help," he managed before consciousness abandoned him again. Zara weighed her options quickly. Leaving him in the rain would surely kill him. Taking him in could be dangerous. But something in his face, the absence of hardness she'd seen in drifters and outlaws who occasionally passed through, made her decision. With considerable effort, Zara managed to drag the unconscious man toward her home. His weight proved challenging for her slender frame, but determination lent her strength. Once inside, she left him on the floor by the hearth while she tended to his horse, leading the exhausted animal to her small barn where her own mare stood. When she returned, soaked to the skin and shivering, the stranger remained unconscious. Zara built up the fire, then turned her attention to his wound. She cut away the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a bullet hole in his side, angry and red against pale skin. "Lord help me," she murmured, gathering her limited medical supplies, bandages, whiskey, needle, and thread. She had learned basic doctoring out of necessity, as the nearest physician was in town 15 miles away. As she cleaned the wound, the man stirred, groaning in pain. His eyes opened again, confusion clouding them. "Lie still," Zara instructed firmly. "You've been shot." Where he began, trying to rise. "You're at my farm, about 10 miles east of Cottonwood Springs. I'm Zara Sinclair, and you need to stay put unless you want to bleed to death on my floor." He complied, sinking back down. "Ethan Irving," he managed. "Much obliged, ma'am." "Save your strength, Mr. Irving. The bullet passed through, which is lucky, but you've lost a lot of blood." Zara worked methodically, cleaning both entry and exit wounds before stitching them closed with neat, small stitches. The stranger Ethan bit down on a folded leather strap she provided, muffling his cries of pain. When she finished bandaging him, she helped him drink some water and a little whiskey for the pain. "Outlaws," he said hoarsely. "3 of them. Tried to steal the cattle I was driving." "Rest now," Zara replied, not wanting to hear more. The less she knew about this stranger's troubles, the better. "Talk tomorrow." With considerable effort, she managed to help Ethan onto a pallet she made before the hearth. Within minutes, exhaustion and pain had pulled him back into unconsciousness. Zara watched him for a long moment, studying the face that seemed too young for whatever hardships had brought him bleeding to her door. As she finally retired to her own bed, Zara chided herself. Taking in a stranger, a man, went against everything she'd learned about survival, yet something about his vulnerability had breached the walls she'd built around her heart. "Just until he can ride again," she promised herself. "Then he'll be on his way and things will return to normal." But as sleep claimed her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps nothing would be normal again. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Zara rose early as was her habit, checking first on her patient. Ethan slept fitfully, fever having set in overnight. His skin burned beneath her touch as she checked his bandages. "Not good," she murmured, seeing the angry redness around his wounds. Infection was a death sentence for many out here, far from proper medical care. For the next 3 days, Zara barely left Ethan's side. She bathed his brow with cool water, changed his bandages, and forced broth and willow bark tea between his parched lips. When not tending to him, she hurried through her chores, feeding the animals, gathering eggs from her few chickens, and tending her garden. On the 3rd night, when Ethan's fever broke and he slipped into a more restful sleep, Zara finally allowed herself to truly rest. She sat in the rocking chair beside him, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. In repose, with his features relaxed, she noticed details she'd missed before. The light scattering of freckles across his nose, the small scar at his temple, the dark lashes that rested against his cheeks. "Who are you, Ethan Irving?" she whispered to the sleeping man. "And what trouble have you brought to my door?" The following morning, Zara woke with a start, realizing she'd fallen asleep in the chair. To her surprise, Ethan was awake, watching her with those whiskey-colored eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair," he said, his voice stronger than it had been. Zara straightened, instantly self-conscious about her rumpled appearance and the intimacy of having slept in the same room. "You remember my name." "Hard to forget the angel who saved my life." A smile touched his lips briefly before fading. "I've put you in considerable danger, ma'am, and for that I apologize." "How do you feel?" Zara asked, ignoring his comment as she knelt beside him to check his bandages. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, but considerably better than dead, which is what I'd be without your help." His wound looked better, still angry, but the worst of the infection appeared to have passed. "You'll live," she pronounced, "though you shouldn't try moving much for another few days." "I shouldn't stay that long," Ethan replied, his expression darkening. "Those men might be looking for me." "You mentioned outlaws. Were they after more than just cattle?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I work for the Rocking J Ranch south of here. Was bringing a cash payment back to the ranch when they ambushed me. I managed to hide the money before they caught up to me, but they're not the type to give up easy." Zara's stomach tightened with apprehension. "You brought outlaws to my doorstep." "Not intentionally," Ethan said, genuine regret in his eyes. I rode hard and in circles before my horse started giving out. I don't think they followed me, but I can't be certain. Zara stood abruptly. As soon as you're well enough to ride, you need to leave. Yes, ma'am, he agreed. I'd leave now if I could stand without falling over. Something in his humble acceptance softened her anger. Well, you can't, so for now you'll rest and regain your strength. I'll keep watch. Over the next few days, Ethan's health improved steadily. Zara maintained her distance, speaking to him only when necessary as she brought food or checked his wounds. But in the small confines of the cabin, true distance was impossible. She found herself noticing things about him, the way he thanked her for every small kindness, how he watched the birds outside the window with childlike interest, the gentleness in his hands when he petted her farm cat that had taken an inexplicable liking to him. On the 5th day, Ethan was strong enough to sit at her table for meals. As they ate a simple supper of rabbit stew, Zara finally asked the question that had been troubling her. Why were you carrying cash alone? Seems foolish. Ethan nodded, accepting the criticism. It was. Boss usually sends 2 men, but we're short-handed with roundup coming. I volunteered, thinking I could handle it. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Pride cometh before a fall, as they say. Where were you shot? About 5 miles south of here, near Campbell Creek. Zara's spoon clattered against her bowl. That's Blackwood Gang territory. Everyone knows to avoid that area. I'm not from around here, Ethan admitted. Only been working at the Rocking J for 3 months. Came west from Missouri after the war. You fought, Zara couldn't help asking, her thoughts turning to Thomas. Ethan nodded slowly. Union cavalry. Enlisted at 18, spent 3 years fighting. Saw things no man should see. He paused, studying her. Your husband, too. The question caught Zara off guard. How did you? Wedding band on your finger. Man's boots by the door too large for you, but no man around and the cabin feels lonely. He immediately looked contrite. Forgive me, that was too forward. Zara twisted the gold band she still wore. Yes, my husband Thomas fought, didn't come home. Pneumonia took him in an army hospital in '65. I'm sorry, Ethan said simply, and she could tell he meant it. A heavy silence fell between them until Ethan spoke again. Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair, not just for saving my life, but for your hospitality. It's more than I had any right to expect. Zara, she said suddenly, if you're going to be recuperating under my roof, you might as well use my given name. The smile that crossed his face was genuine, transforming his features and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Thank you, Zara. The way he said her name, soft and respectful, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, a sensation she quickly suppressed. Attachment was dangerous, especially to a man who would soon ride away. 2 days later, Ethan insisted on helping with chores. Though still weak, he managed to collect eggs and feed the animals while Zara worked in her garden. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noting how, even in his injured state, he moved with a certain grace and confidence. You're staring, Mrs. Sinclair, he called out, catching her gaze. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Just making sure you don't fall over and undo all my careful nursing, she replied briskly. Ethan approached, carrying the basket of eggs. I've been meaning to ask, how do you manage all this alone? It's a lot of work for one person. I manage because I must, Zara answered, returning to her weeding with renewed vigor. This land is all I have left of Thomas. I promised I'd keep it. It's admirable, Ethan said, settling carefully onto a nearby stump. Most widows would have sold and moved back east or remarried. There have been offers, Zara admitted, thinking of the county clerk's persistent suggestions. None I cared to accept. The land means that much to you. Zara sat back on her heels, considering the question. It's not just the land, it's independence, being beholden to no one. Making my own decisions. She looked across the fields that stretched toward the distant mountains. Out here, I'm judged by what I can do, not who I'm supposed to be. Ethan nodded slowly. I understand that. It's partly why I came west, too. The conversation shifted to safer topics, the weather, the prospects for rain, the temperament of her chickens. But something had changed between them, a small but significant shift in understanding. That night, as they sat before the fire, Ethan asked if she had any books. Zara brought out her small collection, the Bible, a volume of Shakespeare's works, a book of poetry, and a few dime novels Thomas had enjoyed. Ethan selected the Shakespeare, handling the leather-bound book with reverence. "My mother taught school," he explained. "She loved the bard, used to read to us children every night." "You can read it if you like," Zara offered. "I haven't opened it in some time." "Perhaps I could read aloud," Ethan suggested. "As repayment for your kindness. My mother always said a well-read story was good medicine." Zara hesitated, then nodded. As Ethan's deep voice filled the cabin with words of love and loss, adventure and redemption, she felt something within her slowly unfurling, like a flower that had forgotten the warmth of spring. She found herself watching his face as he read, the way his expressions changed with the characters, how the firelight cast shadows across his features. It became a nightly ritual. After supper was cleared and evening chores completed, they would sit by the fire while Ethan read. Zara would mend or knit as she listened, occasionally glancing up to find his eyes on her, warm and attentive. Those moments, brief as they were, stirred something she had thought long dead, a flutter of awareness of possibility. By the end of the second week, Ethan was well enough to ride. They both knew he should leave, yet neither mentioned it. Instead, he took on more chores, fixing the loose boards on her porch, mending fences, and even beginning to plow the field for winter wheat. "You don't need to work so hard," Zara told him one afternoon as they shared water from the same ladle. "You're still healing." "I like being useful," Ethan replied. "Besides, it's the least I can do for your hospitality." His shirt was open at the collar, revealing sun-bronzed skin and the edge of his bandage. A light sheen of sweat made his forearms glisten as he worked the plow. Zara looked away, unsettled by her notice of such details. "Well, don't tear your stitches," she said, more sharply than intended. "I've no desire to sew you up again." Ethan caught her arm gently as she turned to go. "Zara," he said, his voice soft, "have I offended you somehow?" The simple touch of his hand sent warmth spiraling through her. She pulled away. "No, you should be thinking about when you'll return to your ranch. They must be wondering what happened to you." A shadow crossed his face. "I've been thinking about that. I need to get that money back to them. It's their cattle payment. They can't afford to lose it." "Where did you hide it?" "Hollow tree near where I was ambushed. I'm just not sure I should retrieve it alone, injured as I am." Zara frowned. "You can't possibly be thinking of going back there until you're fully healed." "I need to, Zara. Mr. Jenkins trusted me with his money. His ranch is struggling, and without that payment he might lose everything." The earnestness in his voice touched something in Zara. This was a man of principle, someone who valued his word and the trust placed in him. It reminded her painfully of Thomas. "Then I'll go with you," she found herself saying, surprising them both. "Absolutely not," Ethan protested. "It's too dangerous." "And it's less dangerous for you, still recovering from a bullet wound," Zara challenged. "Besides, those outlaws are looking for a lone man, not a couple." The word couple hung between them, laden with unintended meaning. Zara hurried to clarify. "I mean, a man and woman traveling together would attract less suspicion." Ethan studied her face intently. "Why would you risk yourself like that for me?" Zara turned away, unable to meet his searching gaze. "Not for you, for your employer. I know what it means to be on the verge of losing everything." The next morning they set out at dawn. Zara wore her most serviceable dress and boots, with Thomas's old pistol concealed in the pocket of her coat. Ethan rode his bay gelding, while Zara mounted her gray mare. They traveled south, taking a roundabout route to avoid open prairie where they might be spotted. As they rode, Ethan told her more about himself, growing up in a small Missouri town as the son of a schoolteacher and a blacksmith, his 3 sisters who still wrote him regular letters, his dreams of someday having his own ranch. "What about you?" he asked as they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. "Did you always live in Colorado territory?" Zara shook her head. "I grew up in Pennsylvania. My father was a doctor. I was supposed to marry the son of his colleague, become a proper doctor's wife." "What happened?" "I met Thomas at a church social. He was passing through, working on the railroad, not the match my parents wanted for their only daughter." Zara smiled faintly at the memory. "We eloped, came west when Thomas heard about the Homestead Act. He had dreams of building something that would be ours alone." And then the war came, Ethan said quietly. Yes, he felt he had to go. His father had been an abolitionist, and Thomas believed in the cause. I stayed behind to hold our claim. Zara looked into the distance. He wrote beautiful letters, full of promises about the life we would build when he returned. I'm sorry he never got the chance, Ethan said, genuine compassion in his voice. Zara nodded, surprised at how sharing the story with Ethan eased some of the ache that usually accompanied thoughts of Thomas. We're burning daylight, she said, changing the subject. We should keep moving. By mid-afternoon, they approached Campbell Creek. Ethan grew visibly tense, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The hollow tree is just beyond that ridge, he said, pointing. We should leave the horses here and approach on foot. They dismounted and secured the horses in a small grove of cottonwoods. Ethan removed his rifle from its scabbard, checking that it was loaded. Stay behind me, he instructed as they began walking toward the ridge. If anything happens, you run for the horses, don't wait for me. I didn't come this far to abandon you, Zara replied stubbornly. Zara, please. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. The intensity in his eyes startled her. There was more than concern there, something deeper that made her heart beat faster. She nodded reluctantly. Fine, but the same goes for you. No heroics. They crept cautiously over the ridge. The landscape below appeared deserted, a winding creek bordered by cottonwoods and willows, tall grass waving in the light breeze. Ethan pointed to a massive old cottonwood with a distinctive split trunk. That's it, he whispered. Wait here while I check that it's clear. We go together, Zara insisted. 4 eyes are better than 2. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but ultimately nodded. They descended the slope slowly, every sense alert for danger. The only sounds were birdsong and the gentle gurgle of the creek. When they reached the tree, Ethan knelt and reached deep into a hollow between the split trunks. His face lit with relief as he withdrew a small leather pouch. It's still here, he said, showing Zara the substantial weight of coins and bills inside. Thank God, she breathed. Now let's. The crack of a rifle shot interrupted her, the bullet splintering bark inches from Ethan's head. They both dropped to the ground as a voice called out from the tree line across the creek. Found you at last, Cowboy. Thought you could outsmart the Blackwood gang, did you? Ethan pushed Zara behind the thick trunk, shielding her with his body as he raised his rifle. Stay down, he hissed. How many? She whispered. I count 2 on the far bank. Might be more. Another shot rang out, followed by mocking laughter. We've been watching this tree for days, boy. Knew you'd come back for whatever you hid. Now toss that money pouch over here, and maybe we'll let you and your woman live. Ethan's jaw tightened as he pressed the leather pouch into Zara's hands. When I start firing, you run back to the horses. Get out of here. Not without you, Zara protested. This isn't a debate, Ethan said firmly. That's my boss's entire cattle payment. It has to get back to him. Before she could argue further, Ethan leaned out from behind the tree and fired 3 rapid shots toward the outlaws. The men dove for cover, returning fire with less accuracy. Now, Ethan urged, pushing her toward the ridge. Go. Zara clutched the money pouch and began running, keeping low in the tall grass. She had nearly reached the ridge when she heard a pained cry behind her. Turning, she saw Ethan stumble, clutching his leg where a fresh bloodstain was spreading. In that moment, Zara made a choice that defied all logic and self-preservation. She ran back toward him, drawing Thomas's pistol from her coat. What are you doing? Ethan gasped as she reached him. Get out of here. Not without you, she repeated, helping him to his feet. She fired 2 shots toward the outlaws to keep them at bay, then pulled Ethan's arm across her shoulders. Together they staggered toward the ridge, bullets kicking up dirt around them. They somehow reached the crest, tumbling down the other side where they were temporarily hidden from view. Ethan's face was pale with pain, but he managed to stay upright as they hurried toward the horses. They'll be coming, he warned as they mounted hastily. We need to split up. You take the money, head north to my ranch. I'll lead them west. That's insane, Zara objected. You're injured again, you'll never outrun them. I don't intend to outrun them, Ethan said grimly. Just distract them long enough for you to get away. And then what? Let them kill you, Zara demanded. No, we stay together. The sound of horses approaching made the decision for them. With no time to argue further, they spurred their mounts and rode east, away from both the outlaws and the most direct route home. For hours they rode, pushing the horses as hard as they dared, taking advantage of every stream and rocky outcrop to hide their trail. Ethan's makeshift bandage on his leg was soaked with blood, but he refused to stop until dusk began to fall. They found shelter in a small canyon, where a shallow cave offered protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Zara built a small, nearly smokeless fire while Ethan kept watch. "Let me see that leg," she demanded when they were relatively secure. Ethan grimaced as she cut away his blood-soaked trouser leg. The bullet had grazed him deeply, leaving a furrow in his muscle but thankfully missing bone and major vessels. "You're lucky," Zara muttered as she cleaned the wound with water from their canteen and a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. "A little to the right, and you'd have bled to death before we reached the horses." "Lucky as having you with me," Ethan said softly. "You saved my life again." Their eyes met in the flickering firelight. Something changed in that moment, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged between them that neither had been ready to face before. "I couldn't let you die," Zara whispered. Ethan reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with exquisite gentleness. "Why did you really come with me today, Zara?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Zara looked away, busying herself with bandaging his leg. "We should rest," she said, avoiding his question. "We have a long ride tomorrow." But that night, as they lay near the small fire with only their saddles for pillows, Zara found sleep elusive. The events of the day replayed in her mind, the terror when Ethan was shot, the absolute certainty that she could not leave him behind. Emotions she had walled away for years now surged against those barriers, threatening to breach them entirely. Beside her, Ethan stirred restlessly, his face tight with pain even in sleep. Without thinking, Zara reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his furrowed brow. His expression softened at her touch, and something inside her softened too. Dawn found them alert and ready to move. Ethan's leg was stiff and painful, but he insisted he could ride. They decided to make for the nearest settlement, a small town called Elk Creek about 20 miles northeast. "We can send a telegram to my boss from there," Ethan explained as they mounted up. "Let him know we have the money and we're safe." "And then?" Zara asked, not looking at him as she adjusted her saddle. Ethan hesitated. "Then I take you home." The simple statement carried unspoken questions neither was ready to address. They rode in companionable silence, keeping to less traveled routes. By midday they had seen no sign of the outlaws, allowing them to relax their guard slightly. As they rode side by side through a meadow bright with wildflowers, Ethan finally spoke. "You never answered my question last night." Zara kept her eyes on the horizon. "Which question was that?" "Why you really came with me." She considered deflecting again, but found herself unwilling to hide behind half-truths any longer. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of you facing danger alone," she admitted quietly. "Because in the weeks you've been at my farm, I've felt more alive than I have in years." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Zara finally turned to meet his gaze, finding warmth and something more intense there. "Zara," Ethan began, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever he might have said was lost, as shots suddenly rang out behind them. Turning in the saddle, they spotted 3 riders cresting a hill less than a quarter-mile away. The outlaws had found them. "Ride!" Ethan shouted, digging his heels into his horse's flanks. They galloped across the meadow toward a distant tree line, bullets whistling past them. Zara's mare was faster than Ethan's injured gelding, but she refused to pull ahead, keeping pace beside him. "The trees," Ethan gasped, pointing toward the dense forest ahead. "We can lose them there." They pushed their mounts to their limits, reaching the forest edge just as another volley of bullets tore through the air around them. Inside the woods, they were forced to slow, picking their way through the underbrush. "We need to separate," Ethan insisted. "Give me the money. I'll lead them away while you make for Elk Creek." "That's the second time you've suggested sacrificing yourself," Zara replied tersely. "My answer is still no." "These men will kill us both if they catch us," Ethan argued. "At least one of us should have a chance." "Then we make sure they don't catch us," Zara said with determination. "I know these woods. There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles north." We can hole up there, maybe set an ambush of our own." Ethan stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Lead the way." They traveled slowly, careful to leave as little trail as possible. The forest grew denser, the ancient pines creating a cathedral-like canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Despite their dire circumstances, Zara found herself watching Ethan, the set of his jaw, the alertness in his eyes, the quiet competence with which he moved through the wilderness. The trapper's cabin appeared exactly where Zara remembered, a small, dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky hillside. They approached cautiously, Ethan scanning the area for any sign of danger while Zara checked the cabin itself. "It's empty," she reported. "Hasn't been used in years from the looks of it." They led their exhausted horses around to the back of the cabin, concealing them in a small clearing sheltered by pines. Inside, the cabin was dusty but intact, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and a narrow bed frame with a rotting mattress. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Ethan remarked, "but it beats sleeping in the open with those men hunting us." Zara barred the door and moved to the single window, peering out at the woods. "We should take turns keeping watch. They might track us here." Ethan nodded, wincing as he lowered himself onto an old wooden chair. His leg was bleeding again, the bandage soaked through. "Let me change that," Zara said, kneeling beside him with the last clean strips of cloth from her petticoat. As she worked, her hands gentle but efficient, Ethan watched her face. "You would have made a fine doctor's wife," he said softly. "You have healing hands." Zara glanced up, surprised. "I never wanted to be a doctor's wife. Just a wife to the man I loved." "And now," Ethan asked, his voice hardly more than a whisper, "what do you want now, Zara?" The question pierced her defenses. What did she want? For 2 years she had wanted nothing beyond survival, beyond keeping her promise to Thomas. But now, "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Everything feels different." Ethan covered her hand with his own. "Different how?" Zara stared at their joined hands, unable to find words for the tumult of emotions within her. Instead, she pulled away, returning to her task of bandaging his leg. "We should conserve our supplies," she said practically. "No fire unless absolutely necessary. We have jerky and biscuits that should last a day or two." Ethan accepted her retreat, though something in his eyes told her the conversation was merely postponed, not abandoned. They settled into an uneasy vigilance, taking turns watching from the window while the other rested. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, the distant howl of wolves, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through pine needles. During her watch, Zara found herself studying Ethan as he slept. The moonlight filtering through the window illuminated his features, the strong line of his jaw, now darkened with several days' growth of beard. The slight furrow between his brows that remained even in sleep, the curve of his mouth that had begun to appear in her dreams. When had this man, this stranger who had collapsed bleeding at her doorstep, become someone she couldn't imagine losing? The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Near dawn, Ethan joined her at the window, his warm presence beside her a comfort in the pre-dawn chill. "No sign of them?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," Zara confirmed. "Maybe we lost them." Maybe, Ethan didn't sound convinced, or maybe they're just biding their time. They watched the forest brighten with the first rays of sunlight. Birds began their morning songs, and deer moved delicately through the underbrush. "It's beautiful," Ethan observed. "Almost makes you forget there are men with guns looking for us." Zara smiled despite their situation. "The frontier is like that, beauty and danger side by side." "Like you," Ethan said, his gaze shifting from the forest to her face. Zara's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "I'm hardly dangerous, Mr. Irving." "I disagree, Mrs. Sinclair," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "You've completely upended my life." Before Zara could respond, a sound from outside froze them both, the unmistakable crunch of boots on forest debris. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, then motioned for her to move away from the window. He retrieved his rifle, checking that it was loaded. Voices drifted to them, low and menacing. "Tracks lead this way." "They can't be far." "That woman shot at me. I aim to return the favor." "Boss wants the money first, then you can do what you want with them." Ethan's expression hardened as he heard the threat. He leaned close to Zara, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a back window in the corner. When I start shooting, you slip out that way, head northeast toward Elk Creek." "I told you I'm not leaving you," Zara whispered fiercely. "Damn it, Zara," Ethan hissed. "This isn't about bravery. Those men will do worse than kill you if they catch you." The footsteps grew closer. Zara made her decision. She drew Thomas's pistol, checking that all chambers were loaded. "We go together or not at all," she said with quiet finality. "I'll take the back window, create a distraction. You take the front. Between us, we might manage to drive them off." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If anything happens to you." "Nothing will happen to either of us," Zara interrupted. "We have too much left to say to each other." With that promise hanging between them, Zara moved silently to the back window. She eased it open, wincing at the slight creak of the old wood. Outside, she could see two men approaching the front of the cabin while a third circled toward the side. Taking a deep breath, Zara aimed at a tree well away from any of the men and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, startling birds into flight. The outlaws whirled toward the sound, momentarily confused. In that instant, Ethan fired through the front window, his shot catching one of the men in the shoulder. The outlaw went down with a cry of pain. "It's an ambush," one of the remaining men shouted. Zara fired again, this time aiming closer to the second man. He dove for cover behind a fallen log, returning fire wildly. Bullets splintered the cabin wall near her head, sending wood fragments flying. She ducked, heart pounding. The exchange of gunfire continued for several minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Zara had 3 bullets left in Thomas's pistol when she heard a sound that chilled her blood, the creak of the back door being slowly pushed open. The third outlaw had circled around completely during the firefight. Zara spun, raising her pistol as the door swung open to reveal a bearded man with cold eyes and a vicious smile. "Well, ain't you a pretty one?" he drawled, his own gun trained on her. "Drop the pistol, sweetheart, or I decorate these walls with your brains." Zara hesitated, calculating her chances. The outlaw's finger tightened on the trigger, his intention clear in his merciless gaze. Suddenly, Ethan was there, launching himself at the man with a roar of fury. The 2 men crashed to the floor, grappling for control of the outlaw's gun. Zara raised her pistol, but they were moving too fast, rolling across the floor in a deadly embrace. The gun discharged with a deafening report in the confined space. Both men went still. "Ethan!" Zara cried, fear strangling her voice. For one terrible moment, neither man moved. Then Ethan pushed himself up, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. The outlaw lay motionless beneath him, a spreading crimson stain on his chest. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked urgently, moving to her side. "No, I—" The front door burst open as the 2 remaining outlaws charged in, guns blazing. Ethan shoved Zara behind him, returning fire. His first shot went wide, but his second caught one of the men in the chest. The outlaw stumbled backward, his expression one of surprise as he collapsed. The last man, larger than the others, with a jagged scar down one cheek, fired again. Ethan grunted in pain as the bullet grazed his arm, but he kept his rifle steady. Their eyes locked across the smoke-filled room. "Give me the money, cowboy," the outlaw demanded. "Maybe I'll let the woman live." "You're not touching her," Ethan replied, his voice deadly calm, "and you're not getting the money." The standoff stretched for a heartbeat, 2 men with guns, neither willing to back down. Then several things happened at once. The outlaw shifted his aim toward Zara. Ethan lunged forward. Zara raised her pistol and fired her last bullet. The outlaw's shot went wild as Zara's bullet found its mark in his chest. He staggered, disbelief crossing his features before he fell heavily to the floor. Silence descended, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant call of a hawk. Ethan turned to Zara, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "We saved each other," Zara replied, her hands trembling as the enormity of what had just happened washed over her. She had killed a man, she had saved Ethan. Somehow the latter seemed to overshadow the former. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as reaction set in. Zara pressed her face against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence, from the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "It's over," Ethan murmured against her hair. "We're safe now." They remained that way for long moments, neither willing to let go. When Ethan finally loosened his embrace, he didn't step away. Instead, his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Zara," he said, her name a prayer on his lips, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said days ago." She looked up at him, seeing in his eyes the same emotion that had been growing in her own heart. "I've fallen in love with you," Ethan confessed softly. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas. But I had to tell you in case." Zara silenced him by pressing her fingers gently to his lips. "No more in case," she whispered, "no more preparing for the worst." She took a deep breath, finding courage to speak the truth she had been avoiding. "When I saw you get shot yesterday, I realized something. The walls I built after Thomas died, they're not protecting me anymore, they're just keeping me from living." Ethan's eyes never left hers as she continued, "I'm afraid, Ethan. Afraid of feeling this much again, afraid of losing someone else I care about, but I'm more afraid of never taking the chance." With gentle hands, Ethan drew her closer. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me," he said. "No one on the frontier can make that promise, but I can promise that every day we have together will be worth the risk." In the blood-spattered cabin, surrounded by evidence of how fragile life could be, Ethan lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Zara responded, rising on her toes to meet him, the kiss deepened, a confirmation, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Come back to the ranch with me," he said. "Meet my boss, let me court you properly." Zara smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I'd like that." They left the cabin within the hour, after binding Ethan's arm and collecting the outlaws' weapons. The ride to Elk Creek was uneventful, the forest peaceful now that the danger had passed. In town, they reported the incident to the local sheriff, who recognized the outlaws' descriptions immediately. "You two took down the Blackwood gang?" he asked incredulously. "There's a significant bounty on them, been terrorizing these parts for months." The telegram they sent to the Rocking J Ranch brought a swift response. Ethan's employer, James Jenkins, would meet them in Elk Creek the following day. They took rooms at the small hotel, separate rooms, as propriety demanded, though neither slept much, too aware of what had changed between them and too filled with anticipation for what might come next. Mr. Jenkins arrived with 2 ranch hands, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Ethan. "Irving, thought we'd lost you, son," he said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Nearly did, sir," Ethan replied, recounting their ordeal while downplaying his own injuries. When Ethan presented the leather pouch containing the cattle payment, Jenkins' eyes grew suspiciously bright. "This will save the ranch," he said gruffly, "and the bounty on those outlaws will see you both nicely rewarded." He turned to Zara, taking her hand. "Ma'am, the Rocking J owes you a debt we can never repay. You saved not just Ethan, but all of us who depend on the ranch." Zara shook her head. "I only did what anyone would do." "No, ma'am," Jenkins disagreed. "Most would have left a wounded stranger to die. You're a rare woman." The bounty, when collected, was substantial, enough to make a significant difference to both their futures. As they rode back toward Zara's farm, Ethan broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "What now?" he asked. "I need to return to the Rocking J. I gave my word to Jenkins." Zara nodded, understanding the bind. She had her farm, he had his commitments. Neither could simply abandon their responsibilities. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm not willing to lose this, to lose us, before we've even begun." Ethan reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand. "Then we find a way." Together. At her farmhouse, everything looked exactly as they had left it days before, yet Zara felt as though she were seeing it through new eyes. The isolation that had once seemed a refuge now felt like a prison. The memories of Thomas that haunted every corner seemed less vivid, as though making room for new memories to form. That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson, Ethan spoke of possibilities. "Jenkins offered me a partnership," he said, "a small stake in the Rocking J in exchange for staying on as foreman." "That's wonderful," Zara said sincerely. "You deserve it." "Thing is," Ethan continued, "the ranch is only about 20 miles from here." "Not an impossible distance." Zara smiled, understanding what he was suggesting. not impossible at all. I thought perhaps I could come calling on Sundays, Ethan said, a touch of nervousness in his voice. Court you properly, like I said. I'd like that, Zara replied, her heart full. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Ethan would ride over every Sunday, arriving in time for church if Zara wished to attend, staying until dusk. Sometimes he would bring supplies she couldn't easily obtain herself. Other times he brought small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered along the way. They spoke of everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Zara told him more about Thomas, finding that sharing those memories with Ethan somehow made them sweeter rather than more painful. Ethan spoke of the war, of comrades lost, and the nightmares that sometimes still plagued him. In late summer, as they walked through Zara's ripening wheat field, Ethan stopped suddenly, taking both her hands in his. I've been thinking, he said, uncharacteristically serious, about the future, about us. Zara's heart quickened. What about us? I love you, Zara. These past months have been the happiest of my life. But this arrangement, seeing you only once a week, always leaving at dusk, it's not enough anymore. Fear flickered briefly in Zara's chest. Was he ending things? Had he grown tired of the distance between them? What are you saying, Ethan? He took a deep breath. I'm saying I want to build a life with you. I'm saying I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I'm saying, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, I'm asking if you'll marry me. Joy flooded through Zara, bright and overwhelming. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Ethan stood, gathering her into his arms and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his expression grew serious again. There's more, he said. Jenkins is expanding the ranch, bought the Peterson place that borders your land to the west. Zara nodded. She had heard the Petersons were selling out, moving back east. He's offered me the chance to manage that section, Ethan continued. Build a house there, we'd be part of the Rocking J but have our own place. And he hesitated, watching her reaction carefully. We could work both properties. Your land would remain yours, but we'd run them together. The proposal was perfect, a way to honor her promise to Thomas while building a new life with Ethan. Zara felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. That sounds wonderful, she said softly, absolutely wonderful. They were married in the small church in Cottonwood Springs 2 months later. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by Ethan's boss and fellow ranch hands, a few of Zara's neighbors, and even Ethan's youngest sister who made the journey from Missouri. As they exchanged vows, Zara thought of how far she had come from the lonely widow who had once believed that the frontier allowed no room for love or dreams. The man before her, once a stranger bleeding on her doorstep, had shown her that even in the harshest places, the heart could find home. Their wedding night was spent in Zara's farmhouse, which would soon be just one of their homes. As Ethan held her in the darkness, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, Zara felt the last of her protective walls crumble away, replaced by something stronger, trust, hope, love. What are you thinking? Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. That sometimes the things we think will destroy us are actually saving us, she replied. If you hadn't been shot, if you hadn't collapsed at my door that night. If you hadn't taken in a half-dead stranger, Ethan added, our paths would never have crossed. Ethan tightened his arms around her. I don't believe that. Somehow, some way, we would have found each other. In the years that followed, their love only deepened. The house Ethan built on the Peterson place became their main residence, though they maintained Zara's original farmhouse as well. The combined property flourished under their joint care, becoming one of the most productive in the county. 2 years after their wedding, Zara gave birth to a son they named Thomas James Irving, in honor of both her first husband and Ethan's boss, who had become like family. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, then another son, William. Life was not always easy. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving at times. Drought, blizzards, and occasional illness tested their resilience. But they faced each challenge together, their love a shelter against whatever storms came their way. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Zara back to the trapper's cabin where they had fought for their lives and confessed their love. The small structure had been repaired and improved over the years, becoming a retreat for them on rare occasions when they could leave the children with trusted friends. As they sat before a proper fire in the now sturdy fireplace, Ethan handed Zara a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, smiling. "Open it and see." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Ethan's neat handwriting. The first entry was dated the day after he had regained consciousness in her farmhouse. "I've kept it all these years," Ethan explained as Zara turned the pages in wonder. "Every important moment, every thought I wanted to preserve." The journal chronicled their journey, from strangers to reluctant allies to lovers to family. The final entry, dated that very morning, read simply, "10 years ago, I found home in her eyes. Every day since has been a blessing I never thought to deserve." Tears blurred Zara's vision as she closed the journal and looked at the man who had transformed her life. "I love you, Ethan Irving," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "more than I ever imagined possible." "And I love you, Zara Irving," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "You saved more than my life that stormy night. You saved my heart." As they held each other in the cabin that had witnessed their courage and their declarations, Zara reflected on how completely her perspective had changed. The frontier that had once seemed so isolating was now the backdrop for a life richer and more fulfilling than she had ever dreamed possible. The prairie skies that had once watched over her loneliness now sheltered a family bound by love and shared purpose. And the stranger who had arrived bleeding on her doorstep had become the center of a world built on trust, respect, and devotion. Under those vast prairie skies, their hearts had truly found home, in the land they nurtured together, in the family they created, and most of all in each other.